Promising. All right, I see people coming in. Little counter going up. Welcome everyone. I said this is a part of the beginning of the sessions where you just get to hear me blabble for a second, just so we know that we're not frozen as people come into the space. And I'm just going to say welcome everyone in the chat. So we've got that chat pulled up. Feel free to share what you're reading these days. Always, I know people like to share where they're coming from, but I love to hear what people are reading. So that might just be a selfish question on my part. Or whatever else you want to share. You can acquaint yourself with both the chat and the Q&A box, which is also probably at the lower part of your screen. And you're going to be welcome to share questions throughout the conversation, and we'll get to those towards the end. And yes, I don't know if this is Lynn who's joining us, but yes, we are about to.
Oh,
There's a lot of people who are coming in from very wet places right now. So including I'm in New York and we're also getting soaked. So
I was originally supposed to do a signing on the Eastern Shore this weekend. We moved that sucker.
Well, I'm glad also we're both online. Hopefully our technology holds up.
Maybe
Everyone.
this is the point where we tell people that when my glasses go blue, it's the computer coding. It's not some strange electronic thing I'm doing to y'all.
Yes,
it's
yes.
Reflection from the.
It is. It is a not unexpected thing for the evening for either of us, but perhaps for those who are coming in. Thanks for sharing some of those reading suggestions. And I think I know there's some more people coming in, but we'll probably get started here. I feel like I made popcorn last night, and on the stove, it's where you hear those last couple of pops.
Yes.
And you're like, is it done? Is it done? Is it done? And you're like, okay, yes, I think perhaps it's done. So all of you are now popcorn kernels, and I think you may have all entered the pot, so to speak. Feel free to keep saying hi in the chat and sharing those reading suggestions, non-suggestions, things you've loved. And I think we'll get started now. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Freeman, and on behalf of Mystery Writers of America, welcome again to some of you to MWA University. MWA-U 2024 includes 6 online classes taught by top-notch crime writers, and here we are at session 3 with Donna Andrews. A reminder that these classes are free to current MWA members, so if you're not a member yet, consider this an invitation to join and an excellent reason to do so. For this session, Donna will be presenting for about 30 minutes, and then I'll come back on screen to facilitate audience questions. So please, again, feel free to share those in the Q&A box. If you share them in the chat, I'll try to grab them as well, but the Q&A box is a great place for them to go, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. I'll also be sharing a link to buy Donna's books from Murder by the Book in Houston, our partner bookstore for this series, or wherever books are sold, your local library, friends, family. And now to introduce our presenter for the evening. Donna Andrews is the Agatha, Anthony, and Lefty award-winning author of the Meg Lanslow series from Minotaur. Just out yesterday, right, Donna?
Yes.
Was so happy Pub Week. Was the 35th book in this New York Times bestselling series, Between a Flock and a Hard Place. Yes, I see congratulations coming up. Excellent, bring those in. His 36th book, Rockin' Around the Chickadee, will be out this October, so you can pre-order that now. And I think 2024 marks the 25th year of this deeply beloved series, so congratulations on a quarter century. Donna is also the editor with Greg Herron and Art Taylor of the Anthony-nominated School of Hard Knocks, KNOX anthology, in addition to 11 anthologies with co-editors Barb Goffman and Marcia Talley. A longtime member of Mystery Writers of America and Sisters in Crime, she currently serves, thank you very much, as MWA's Executive Vice President. When not writing, well, who are we kidding? She's always writing something. Our previous sessions have covered characters and conflict, and our topic today is dialogue. Let's dig into Donna's highly practical techniques and exercises to help improve your dialogue. Donna, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming. When they told me I was going to do this session on dialogue, I panicked briefly because I realized I can't possibly cover everything you need to know about dialogue in half an hour, maybe less if I talk fast enough. I mean, people have written whole books about dialogue and I talk fast, but not that fast. But what I decided I could do in half an hour was give you a small number of practical techniques and exercises that you can actually use to improve your writing. It's basically weird stuff I actually do myself. Uh, the first, I've got 5 of them. The first one is what I call get the right people in the room or on stage. If you prefer that metaphor, I worked backstage in a lot of college theater productions, and I like the on-stage metaphor. This applies to both your book as a whole and to any particular scene you may happen to be writing or revising. We plotters, I'm mostly a plotter, not as much of a plotter as I used to be. Plotters should be thinking of it as we do the planning of our book. And you pantsers will have to either do it on the fly or in revisions, whatever works. But focusing on it at some point will really help you strengthen your dialogue. Uh, there's 2 things to consider when you figure out who to have in the room. First, you want to make sure that you've got people on stage who need to tell each other what you need your readers to learn. That sounds really basic, but it's surprising how many people forget about that or ignore it. Uh, Nothing makes your dialogue more stilted, more unrealistic, more thudding than to have people sitting there telling each other stuff they all know, stuff that's old news. You end up having your characters say awkward things like, well, of course, as you probably already know. No, don't go there. Look for the person who's not from around here, the person who doesn't know what your audience needs to learn. Um, give you an example. Say your book is kind of like a riff on And Then They Were None, and it takes place in a convent where 10 aging sisters of mercy have been living together for several decades. You're going to need a fresh face if you want to have any conversations that are more deep than good morning, good evening, and pass the salt. Bring in a new nun, or better yet, bring in a visiting non-Catholic, a new cook, for example, someone who doesn't know everything, doesn't know any of the sisters, doesn't know all the old feuds and alliances, doesn't know how a convent works, and has to have all of that explained to her. The dialogue will come alive. Uh, Say your scene involves 3 seasoned homicide investigators, and they're talking over a case. Your reader might not know exactly how the steps of an investigation work, and they're not going to be talking in the kind of detail that your reader needs. They're not going to be explaining their jobs to each other. They work together every day. Bring in a rookie or a reporter or a suspect who happens to be lurking around the station. You know, anyone who doesn't know how police investigations work and and like the reader, needs to learn about it. The second and possibly more important thing to do when you're talking about getting the right people in the room, bring in conflict. If all the characters, either in your book or in a particular conversation or dialogue, if they all have the same goals, the same attitudes, the same point of view, your dialogue's not going to have much pizzazz. Bring in characters who hate each other or disagree with each other, or at least want to yank each other's chains. We all know that conflict helps increase the tension in a plot. It also, you bring the conflict into the dialogue, and it helps carry that tension out more and more just by having the right people in the room to clash. Uh, One of the best examples I can think of is Holmes and Watson. Uh, and in the Sherlock Holmes canon, if Watson were a brilliant detective like Holmes, Holmes wouldn't have to explain anything to him, and we, the readers, would be really left clueless and out in the cold. But Watson is the perfect foil because he's not stupid, but Sherlock Holmes has to explain the detective. Watson's strengths lie in other areas. And another example, I was recently rewatching a play, Sherlock Holmes and the Strange Case of Alice Faulkner, which was written by William Gillette with a lot of consultation from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And in the play, the third act of this play, Holmes and Professor Moriarty, his nemesis, finally come face to face. The brilliant detective and the criminal genius. And there actually is they exchange the following lines. Moriarty says, "All that I have to say has already crossed your mind." To which Holmes says, "My answer thereto has already crossed yours." And theoretically, that should be the end of the scene. Uh, and as a side note, I rather suspect that Gillette wrote this because was a seasoned actor by that point. He probably spent way too many nights delivering lines in which other characters told each other stuff pages and pages of stuff that they already knew. Fortunately, although we don't have the reader who's not around here, we do have conflict in this scene. It's Sherlock Holmes and his archenemy. So they're so much at odds with each other that even though they both know what's passed through each other's minds, they debate and they rag on each other for the entire wonderfully carpet chewing scene. And there's a filming of that with Frank Langella as Sherlock Holmes. It is wonderful. That's the first tip. Bring the right characters in the room. And once you got them there, that's something you do more in the planning stage along with the revision. This is something you do in the revision stage mostly, or while you're writing if you revise as you go along. Take your dialogue off the page, by which I mean don't just read it, listen to it. And I don't mean using some kind of AI voice to read it, because if you do that, you're missing one of the main benefits of hearing your work read aloud, the mistakes. Your mouth does dialogue much better than your fingers ever will, and your ears are much better at detecting bad dialogue than your eyes will ever be. So use this. Optimally, get someone else to read your work to you. If you've got some friends who are aspiring actors or hands, or family members who can be bribed to do this for you, make them read it aloud to you, and then listen like crazy. Playwrights get enormous help on polishing their dialogue because, unlike novelists and short story writers, we don't get this automatically. They sit at rehearsals, they hear actors trying to make their dialogue work, trying to make their dialogue more natural, more dramatic, trying to improve it. And a smart playwright uses that. So if you and you can benefit from that if you just bribe your friends to read to you. If you can't get other people to read for you, do read aloud yourself. And for key scenes, one thing that I try to do, I recommend doing this, perform it without looking at the page. Uh, read you've got the dramatic scene that you really, really want to have sing. So read it a couple of times until you kind of got it fixed in your mind, and then cover the page and perform it and listen to what comes out of your mouth. Maybe you'll realize that what's on the page is exactly what needs to be there. Or maybe you'll figure out there's a much better way to say something. Either way, you've got to win. So use your ears as well as your eyes and fingers. A third thing that is kind of weird, it will sound trivial, but it's not. Work the dialogue tags. I'm a big believer in what I call special passes. A special pass is when you go through the entire book or story focusing on one thing. And one of the most important things you can focus on, obviously, is the dialogue. And one way to do that more easily is to focus on the dialogue tags. Not because the dialogue tags are of paramount importance, obviously they're not. They're housekeeping. But getting rid of it is a benefit to get rid of the constant repetitive beat of said. But more importantly, if you focus on the dialogue tags, it makes you open up the manuscript and rethink things you haven't thought about since you wrote them down. Start at the very basic level. Look at every single line of dialogue and see, is it clear with every single line of dialogue who says it? And if it's not, make it so. Then go and look, do you have any tags you don't need? The last thing you ever want to do is to have your readers counting up like, so they can figure out who said what, because two characters alternating back and forth. Put enough tags in that you can always follow, and then work on deepening and enriching the dialogue by replacing said and its synonyms with action, description, or thought. And when I say synonyms, yeah, it can be useful to change said to shouted or whispered or answered or asked. Don't get too expostulated and exhorted, and don't use too many fancy synonyms for said. It's better to replace said and its synonyms with something that adds more. Instead of just being punctuation like said, say you have a line that reads, "Hello," he said, "I'm the new guy." That's kind of a bland, it might be what you need to have them say right then, but it's kind of bland and it doesn't get you much. Can you add action? "Hello," he tipped his hat. "I'm the new guy." "Hello," he pointed the gun at me. "I'm the new guy." "Hello," he brought down his sword, cutting the ropes that bound me. "I'm the new guy." Same words, three completely different scenes. You can also add in description. "Thanks," he said. "I'll remember that." Again, kind of bland. "Thanks." His voice was weak, exhausted. "I'll remember that." "Thanks." I could tell he meant it. "I'll remember that." "Thanks." The sour expression on his face contradicted his words. "I'll remember that." Same words, three different scenes. You've replaced the utilitarian said with something that makes your dialogue come more alive by putting it in context. And thought or internal monologue. This is one thing that I love seeing well done, when what someone is saying and what they're thinking interact with each other, contradict each other, reinforce each other. Say you have, "I only just got here," I said. Kind of bland. "I only just got here. I was hoping no one had noticed me lurking in the shadows for the last hour. I only just got here," and was already regretting that I'd ever left the safety of my car. "I only just got here." Why was I bothering to say that? They'd already noticed my hasty arrival. Again, instead of said, you have deepening of the action, more stuff that puts the dialogue in context, putting the dialogue in a setting like a jewel setting. Um, it's also good because I've noticed that a lot, particularly beginning writers, but also writers who are beginning a book, like me when I'm working on a draft, sometimes when we're in draft mode, we write in chunks. We describe the scene, the setting we're in, and then, "Oh, okay, I should describe the characters." You describe the characters. "Okay, let's start the dialogue." No, that kind of separates the setting from the characters and the dialogue. It's like dumping the chocolate chips in the cookie dough and then not stirring it, so that some cookies end up with a lot of chips and some end up with none. When you use the tags to integrate the action, description, internal monologue more closely with the dialogue, you end up with a much richer, deeper, more satisfying whole. Uh, give it a try. It's like some of these techniques, working the dialogue tags becomes a mechanical way of making you take action in places where you realize you need action. Another trick that I like to do, I call it taking out the excess salt. We all know that we shouldn't oversalt something we're cooking, because once it's in there, you can't take it out. And cooking, little known fact I only recently learned, when you cook something you've salted, it cooks the salty taste out, but it leaves the sodium we don't want more of. Fortunately, in writing, the opposite applies. You can always remove the excess salt by revising. So, and by salt here, I'm referring to a variety of seasonings that we add to our dialogue for various good purposes. For example, some of us have salty characters. As we're writing them, they fling around F-bombs like it's confetti. And in the moment, every F-bomb feels right. It seems like exactly what your character should be saying right then. But then you take a step back and you read the whole thing, and it's, holy cow, this sounds like, this sounds terrible. This sounds like nothing but profanity and obscenity. Don't ruin your momentum by agonizing over the salty language while you're writing. Just get it done. get it on paper, and make a point to do a special pass. I'm a big on the special passes. When you only look at the salty language, the F-bombs and other language, and prune out any bits that don't contribute to the scene at hand. And remember, a little goes a long way. If you've ever seen the transcription of what you thought was a brilliant speech, and you hear all the uhs and the hus and the I knows, you know, dialogue that replicates how we swear or how we phrase things in real life usually comes across as really bad on paper if it's taken down directly. Same thing goes with a lot of other things that we tend to overuse. Exclamation points, for example. Not every line of dialogue needs one, even in your most dramatic, action-packed scenes. If you know that you're prone to overusing, for example, exclamation points, ration them. Give yourself a specific quota. I don't know, maybe 20 for the whole book, and then use global search and not global search and replace, global search to find every exclamation point and make it justify its existence. Like, is this exclamation point doing anything that the words and the description doesn't do? Another seasoning to use sparingly, deliberate misspellings of words to indicate how someone's pronouncing or mispronouncing them. Maybe there are readers who like it when the author really does a fabulously intricate job of spelling out every single nuance of a foreign or regional accent. Maybe those readers exist. I think they're few and far between. Tell us that the character has a brogue, or a thick Southern accent, or sounds like a New York cabbie. Maybe show a few dramatic examples of what how that person pronounces things. But then let the reader do the rest. Let the reader fill in the rest. Again, a few examples, a little goes a long way. I'll give you an example. Remember how in the Beverly Hillbillies, uh, the Jed and family used to call their swimming pool the cement pond? I have a character in the book I'm currently working on who absolutely, she's a bit of a country accent, and she absolutely would say cement. And I could spell it Ceement to make sure the reader gets the country pronunciation. Then the reader can hear it. But do I want to? I haven't decided yet. I've gone back and forth, taken it in, putting it out. And I'm certainly not going to spell out everything that person says differently from everyone else. I mean, one or two words. That's the way to get your book thrown across the room. Work on getting the cadence of an accent. Rather than every single subtlety of the pronunciation, the word choice and the rhythm of the sentences. One example of someone who does that very well, if you've ever read Margaret Maron's Deborah Knott books, which take place in Tidewater section of North Carolina, the part where some of y'all are getting drenched right now, sorry about that. She does a really good, when I'm reading her, she does a really good job with word choice and the shape of sentences. I can hear that North Carolina accent, which isn't that different from the Virginia Tidewater accent I grew up hearing. So I can testify that to me, she seems to be getting it right. So figure out what seasonings, what things that spice things up in moderation you might be overusing, and pull back on them. My fifth idea that actually can support some of these other things, work your hit list. What do I mean by a hit list? A hit list, if you don't have a personal hit list, I recommend starting to keep one now. A hit list is a list of all the words that you, not people in general, but you as a writer, overuse or misuse, or have figured out that they signal writing that's flabby or imprecise or colorless. It works for the whole of your book, but it's particularly important for polishing dialogue, because a lot of what you'll have on your hit list will probably be what I call throat clearing words, crutch words. Excuse me, words that we often use, we use and perhaps overuse in dialogue in our possibly misguided attempts to make it sound more natural and informal. So a hit list it's not something you come up with in one book. It's an ongoing career-long project. And the more you use it and build it, the more valuable it becomes. So how do you create your hit list? Open a word processing document and start collecting items. You'll find some of them yourself as you edit yourself. You'll see the stuff that you overuse, the stuff you're not sure you're using correctly. Put that in your hit list. If you work with a critique group or beta readers, if they call you out for it, you're always doing so and so, or are you sure that word means what you, whatever they raise, look it up, and if it seems useful, put it in your hit list. Your copy editor and your editor are golden as far as your hit list is concerned. If your copy letter corrects something in your work, if your editor wants you to change something in your manuscript, see if it's a hit list item. I recall at one point, I didn't really know the difference between further and farther, and my copy editor was always correcting me. I noticed this, I put them on my hit list, now I know the difference. Uh, and and I remember in one book I was editing myself. This is before, luckily, before it got to my editor. Uh, I noticed that about every third sentence that my main character, Meg, said, she would start out with, okay, okay, I'm here now. Okay, I can do that. Okay, I think we have a murder. Used occasionally, that can add a degree of informality and naturalness to the dialogue. Used as much as I was using, it was become a verbal tic, almost amounting to like a Tourette-like syndrome. I had to tame that tic. So I added okay to my hit list. Um, your hit list will grow or at least mutate over time. The good thing is by working your hit list diligently, every time you have a new piece of writing, the odds are pretty good that you'll gradually train yourself to stop misusing or overusing some of the words on it. I got better at okay. I stopped overusing it quite to the same extent. Uh, I learned to only use it when it really added something to the dialogue I was writing. The bad thing is that there are always new hit list candidates popping up. As soon as I beat okay into submission, well took its place. Everything started with well. It's on my hit list now. Um, the fact that something is on your hit list doesn't mean it's a bad word and you can't use it. It just means that for you, the owner of that list, you should take a look at it. You overuse it or misuse it, and you need to focus on whether each time you use it adds something to the sentence, the dialogue you're writing. Another example, just. In my first draft, I am perfectly capable of writing a sentence like, I'm just saying that she's just a kid and we should just forget about what she just did. That's an embarrassing sentence to find you've written, but fortunately, even if you don't pick it up while rereading yourself, your hit list will find every one of those justs, and you can decide which, if any of them, actually need to be in the book. Very and actually are other words that should probably be on everyone's hit lists. And by the way, I'm going to, when they share the materials that I will be making available to them after the class is over, I will include a sample of a hit list that I used recently. Another thing that I recommend putting on your hit list is all parts of the verb to be. Not just in dialogue, but for general use, but it's going to help a lot in dialogue. And that's not because I try to prune out all parts of the verb to be. I worked briefly with an editor who tried to make us do that. All the writers who turned in stuff to you, she'd send it back and make you take out the verb to be in any form. It resulted in some pretty god-awful writing, and I stopped working with that editor. But what can be valuable is to take a cold, hard look at every time a part of to be appears in your prose, especially in dialogue. Yes, sometimes, maybe often, you can improve the strength of your writing by using a more specific or colorful word. For example, I say, "Oh, I was running away." That's fine. Maybe instead of that, I fled. I scampered off. I hightailed it out of there. I ran as if Satan himself was on my tail. Sometimes I was running is absolutely the right thing. Sometimes it's a little blah. And if you look at every single part of the verb to be, and yeah, this is a time-consuming process. This is you with a list of 20, 30, 100 items that you want to look for using global search and just doing a hard look at every single one of them to make sure every single one of them works. But if you do it enough, your dialogue will sing. The rest of the book will also do a certain amount of singing. And I think that was item number 5. I talked too fast, yes. So not only will doing all of this will help your writing in general, and it helps your dialogue especially because bland and nondescript word choice sticks out more in dialogue than in any other part of your writing. So not quite finished. So the 5 tricks that I recommend doing, and I really literally do these to each one of my books or stories or whatever. Get the right people in the room for graceful information transmission and for making sure the conflict in your book makes it into the dialogue. Don't just read the dialogue, listen to it. And having seen Patrick's question, I'll have a comment on that in a minute. Work the dialogue tags, because work in the dialogue tags does more than just fix the tags. It lets you deepen the entire dialogue section. Take out the excess salt, all the things you know you overuse, and work your hit list into the ground. I love the draft phase of writing. As long as I hit my daily quota, I'm happy as a clam in the daily writing period, when I'm working on my quota. My usual quota, I write 1,500 words a day. They can be 1,500 really crappy words, but I've got 1,500 words. I can go away. I can rest. I can get ready for tomorrow. Revision's harder. And I very much believe that I write crappy books. Many of us write crappy drafts, and we revise them into good books, great books. But it can be hard to figure out exactly what you're supposed to be doing when you're revising. And you find yourself sitting there reading and saying, one minute you're thinking, that's great. I don't need to do anything. And the next minute you're like, oh no, it kind of needs something, but what? The reason I like these techniques and others like them, I'm always looking for techniques that help me find the something it needs. Doing a purely mechanical task, like looking at every single time I use the word just, because once you start revising a sentence to take out the word just when you've got it twice, you suddenly think of other improvements you can make. You end up reworking the entire sentence and making it stronger, more dramatic, more memorable. It helps, working these steps helps you recognize the places where the dialogue needs work and tricks you into starting to do it when it's really hard. Because when I finish a book, there's this whole, it's finished. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to take the pieces apart. It's like taking anyone who's ever tried to put the pieces of a pattern back into the envelope or the pieces of some kind of toy back into the box. You take it apart, it doesn't go back in the box, and you feel like you've ruined it. But having mechanical, specific techniques that make you look at the things that will help you improve it work out really well. Advice for distinguishing the voices of the characters. If you're writing first person, your voice, it's all dialogue. So especially if you're writing anything in first person, you can use these techniques for all of the book. One of the things, if I have characters I want to make sure are different, I sometimes use the supercilious trick of casting them with real actors who are very different. If you have a character that you want to be a grande dame and another character that's like, it's like I don't know, a teeny bopper, you cast Maggie Smith as the grande dame and you try to hear her voice. And you cast a juvenile actor, the young Hannah Montana, Miley Cyrus. They have different voices, different ways of speaking. And if you get the right models to kind of like imagine them delivering your words, it can be really helpful. So, and now I am open to other questions. If anyone has other questions, like how to use these, or you never talked about such and such. What would you do about such and such?
Yeah, thanks, Donna. And I know you addressed Patrick's question, which was in the chat, which is
Yes.
exactly where I accidentally told people to put questions when what I meant was the Q&A box. So if you have others, turn to that Q&A box and add them. And thank you for the 5 points. I was taking notes all along and to try to sum up, and then you summed up beautifully for us. And we'll be sending out that
Tell them what you're
material
gonna,
after.
yeah, tell them what you're gonna tell them, and then tell them what you told them. That's what they teach you in, I think, I don't know, essay class.
Well,
Uh,
in addition, we learned something about cooking, which I didn't know regarding salt.
I never, literally, the cooking heat bakes out the saltiness, but the sodium's still there to mess with you.
Well, luckily that doesn't happen with your
Uh,
revisions and your
it doesn't.
edits, that you
Yeah, it
are
doesn't.
able to get out that excess salt. I also love that you mentioned at one point bring in a new nun, because nuns have been coming up in sessions. So I feel like the nun, very useful one.
Yeah,
Um,
I was a Protestant going to a Catholic school, and
ah,
I really, really could have used that person who's not from around here, who could be, who could be, I mean, having all this, what is this May procession thing we're doing? Why is she doing that? Why does this upset her so much? Ugh.
well, that actually leads us to this question. Do you have any suggestions when writing dialogue for a character speaking in a foreign language?
Oh
I
yeah.
find this particular reader finds it annoying when a foreign character speaks and then either they or another character repeats the sentence in English. How
Yeah,
are the multiple ways you might handle that when multiple languages are being spoken?
yeah, it would depend on what's going on. If you're just throwing in some examples of a foreign language, if you have someone who is French and will throw in je ne sais quoi, and make sure. I mean, it's possible. I've actually worked with someone on a story we were editing for an anthology that had a lot of, I forget whether it was French or German, but they had a lot of words, and it felt right for the character. But we really had to work to make sure that the meaning of the foreign words was clear in context. You could say, I mean, if you're talking about the joie de vivre, you might say, I don't know, my joy of living is kind of banished, but whatever he wants. Or if make sure that, find a way to signal what it actually means. Uh, if you're literally having dialogue in a foreign language, rather than showing the dialogue, I would show the translation. You know, someone speak. I waited while she spouted off several paragraphs of Portuguese. Then I turned to my translator. She says no. What do you know? You can actually work some humor and with that, but show that the person, your point of view character, doesn't get it and has to wait for the translation. That would, if I had someone who only spoke the foreign language, that was what I would do. Um, and it's kind of it depends on how much foreign language it is and how important that those words are. If it's just kind of parsley, you put parsley on and you don't eat the parsley, you don't need to translate it. If it's just bon mon dieu, you don't have to translate that. But if it's actual stuff that you want the people to understand, figure out a way to translate it for us. uh, Harriet Sackler says, give examples of the verb to be. More examples of to be. Is, was, were, are, uh, being, been. They're all on, when I share the sample hit quit list, they're all on there because I work every single one of them. And a lot of times people get down on parts of the verb to be because they're taught that the verb to be means passive voice, and they try to exterminate every single you know uh that seat is taken is passive voice. That seat is mine, is not passive voice. That seat belongs to me. It's like the mine is a predicate adjective. It's not passive voice, but people unfairly criticize it as passive voice. You might still want to if you have too many wases and ises, you might still want to write it out. And also, uh, what if you say, I was walking, was does not in that case mean that it's passive voice. It's a particular tense whose name I can never remember. Back when I back when I was taking English classes from the nuns and diagramming sentences, I would have known the name of that tense. But I walked and I was walking are two subtle variations on the past tense, and it's a perfectly legitimate. So if you're using is and what, thank you, Elaine knows the progressive tense. Yes, it's a valid tense. It's not passive. So if you're trying to figure out whether your work has too many passive constructions by just counting the wases and the ises, you're going to count in stuff that's perfectly fine that isn't passive. The king is dead, long live the king. The king died is different. In that sentence, the king is dead, long live the king is exactly how you want to say it. Uh, and sometimes passive voice may be, or any use of the verb to be, may be exactly the best, strongest, most efficient and natural way of communicating something. So don't run away from it if it really is the best way to do it. And thank you, progressive tips. Yeah, and Michelle says she loves the hit list. I live by my hit list. It's like 3 pages long now. And there's stuff I've learned not to do, but I still keep it on the hit list because if you had a bad habit once, you could get that bad habit before again. Anyway, so let's. Do you suggest limiting the number of people on stage? With too many speakers and too much dialogue can create confusion? Yes. If you're creating a group scene, you want to make sure that you need everyone to be there, because it is traffic control just becomes a real problem. Although properly done, and I'll give you an example of a book where I think the author does brilliant traffic control on group conversations, where people are talking at each other, arguing with each other, interrupting each other. Several conversations are going on at once, and yet it all comes together. Joan Didion's novel Democracy, the way she handles the crowd scenes, as it were, in those, you're never at a doubt about who's talking and what their participation is. I mean, I re-listen or reread that occasionally just so I can watch how she does it. But yeah, make sure that that's part of getting the right people in the room. If there's someone who's not just standing there listening, maybe you don't need to have them there, because otherwise it's harder. You have to put in more tags when you have more people. If you have just 2 people, you can kind of like put in a tag every 2 or 3 or 4 lines. If you've got a group, unless it's very obvious who's saying something. And another tiny tip, don't try to signal who's talking by having them address the other person by their name. Do we really do that? Do I normally say, Katie, I want you to do this? Uh, Patrick, thank you for that question. Only if there's a bunch of people who want to call attention to one of them in a crowd, but we don't normally address each other. There's certain circumstances where you can make it clear by having the person named. Mom, where is dinner? That's a normal way. But most times when you try to make it clear who's talking by putting the person they're addressing, it comes across as fakey. It comes across as unnatural. It's not something we normally do in conversation. So think through, do you need those people there? Is there someone that you can have join them later and be brought up? Another thing that I really wish, I read a book recently where every time the detective encountered new set of people, she ended up she repeated much the same dialogue as she'd done with the previous. I mean, by the 4th time she was explaining the entire plot to a new person, I was over it. I didn't want to just say, I told him what I told her. Yeah. So be careful about sometimes it helps to get them all in one group and make sure everybody knows it. But sometimes if you have to do the sequential revelation, don't be afraid to say, I brought him up to speed. I told him what I told the police, stuff like that. Advice on including humor in dialogue. if you want, if you're going to include humor in dialogue, and obviously that's something I'm trying to do all the time. Uh, if you've ever seen, what's the movie where Tom Hanks, uh, the movie where Tom Hanks plays a stand-up comedian and Sally Field is the aspiring stand-up comedian. I can't think of the name of the movie. Punchline. Uh, in the movie Punchline, uh, it's there's a scene where Tom Hanks is staring in a mirror and repeating a line and varying everything in the line. He's putting the emphasis on this syllable and then on that syllable. He's trying it fast. He's just playing with subtle variations of how he says the line aloud. That's kind of what you have to do with humor, because if you're doing suspense and you wander off, and something in your suspense book that lands with a thud, it's easier to recover than if you're it's kind of like humor is kind of like a tennis match and a volley. And if you drop the ball, the scene thuds. So it's very important to work it even harder than the rest of your book. That's when reading it aloud can be very important, and bouncing it off friends who have a sense of humor. Uh, if you have people who find your work, who like your work, find your work funny. I sometimes try my punchlines on a friend. I have a friend I text with all day long. It's like now that I'm not working in an office, it's the coffee room, the copier room conversations. I have them with one or two friends in a text. And I sometimes try the lines on her, but it's the other hard thing is that you have to make sure not only that's funny to you, but that someone else gets the if, for example, it requires you to have an emphasis on a particular syllable, you have to italicize that to make sure they're hitting the right syllable. So you work it harder than any other part of your book. Um, and if it's funny to you, work it till it's funny to you, and then get some guinea pigs and see if it's funny to them. Can I put in the tagline? He said to me, uh, Jim asked, can't you put in the tagline? He said to and mentioned the name. Uh, if if there's a bunch of people in the room and you saying, yeah, like, yes, I said to my brother, no, I said to my sister, you can do that, but it doesn't take the place of identifying the person who's speaking. Uh, it's sometimes useful. You want to make it's a useful bit of traffic control. I turned to the chief and said, I found a clue for you. And then I turned to my dad and said, and you shut up about it. Stuff like that. It's all traffic control. It's making sure that no one is ever in doubt of who's talking and who they're talking to. And I think someone had another question. I forget what it was.
Well, I think we've got time for one more if someone does have
Okay.
another one. There was a question about your excellent book titles, and about doing a session about how cozy authors come up with titles. So if we'll put that to the side for maybe a moment. But if you have, not that you can't talk about your titles,
Yeah.
absolutely. But just to say, if people have suggestions for future sessions or other things you'd like to see discussed, like, of course, always feel free to share with mystery writers about the sort of conversations you'd like to hear. But if you want to, Donna,
Yeah.
I mean, especially you've got the book out yesterday, the one coming up, like, if you want to
Yes,
just
I
mention
just
for a
had a
second
title
about your
of,
titles.
yeah, one of the things is that I'm definitely, I think of most of my titles, but I work at it. It's like, I mean, there's a part of my brain that is always thinking of bird names and trying to stuff them into a title. And I do have a running contest on my website where if you suggest a title and I like it enough that I suggest it to my editor and they use it, I will, if I can find you and hunt you down, I will give you a signed copy of that book. I've done that twice now too. This latest book that I'm writing now, I won't have to do that because my editors at Minotaur, one of the editors at Minotaur, Madeline Haupt, actually suggested it. The next book will be called For Duck's Sake. There's a title I have to say carefully. I won't be saying that in the bar at BoucherCon. But crowdsource it. If you have friends that are good at puns, because often the titles, yes, often the titles involve puns or plays on words. Involve your writer friends, your reader friends. I mean, there's nothing a reader would love more than to have you thank him or her, usually with my readers, more of them hers, to thank him or her in your acknowledgments for having come up with the brilliant title for the book in question. Readers want to help you. Writers love giving each other advice. Crowdsource, that's the key.
Well, that's a fabulous contest, and I shared the link to participate in the chat. Donna, I wanted to ask, you talked a lot about special passes
Mhm.
for dialogue tags, for finding repeated language, like various types of special passes. How, when you're going through with your dialogue, how much are you doing all of the things that you've talked about, taking out the XX salt, et cetera? How much are you doing that in the moment, and how much are you sort of getting through the whole and then spending that time in the revision period?
Uh, I don't work the hit list until I'm fair. The book is, I'm sure that the structure is there and the book is fairly polished. I've had a certain amount of revision. So this is a either a finishing thing before I turn it in, or if I just feel like it needs help at certain points, okay, time to work the hit list. And basically I call up the hit list. It's a graph. It has the words down one side and a box beside each word that I can make notes in or check it off. And I just start with global search. I mean, I sit there and I start off with every version of, if also is on my hit list, I look for every version of also. If bin B is on my hit list, I literally, I go through and I save a copy first, just in case I do anything stupid. I call up a copy, okay, working the hit list, and I just go through with global search and I I think about each instance of that word that is problematic for whatever reason. And a lot of times, in order to fix it, I end up doing much more dramatic revisions than it looks. I don't just replace B with something. I might rewrite half the page, because once you open something up, you suddenly start seeing other stuff you should have done better. That there's nothing better for improving your dialogue or the whole book itself. And since I write in first person, it's all dialogue for me. There's nothing better than something where you have to make a change. And as long as you're making that change, maybe you should make, and wouldn't it be better? I used to have an editor. Back when I had my day job, I had a boss. I miss knowing she's in the world. Uh, she was killed a couple of years ago, and I can no longer, she was an excellent editor. She wasn't, she was the head of communications for this big company, but she happened to be a fabulous line editor. And we all joked, it's like if you could keep her from picking up her red pencil, the longer you could keep her from picking up her red pencil, the less editing you would have to do. As soon as she picked up her red pencil for a absolute no, she'd start doing and this would be better, she'd start giving it measles. But if you're editing your own work, giving it measles might be exactly what you need to do. You tend to think it's a thing, it's done, it's finished. But once you start opening up and playing with it, you free yourself to do many more improvements than you started out doing. And that, I think, is one of the most valuable things, that working the hit list, working any kind of mechanical process, makes you take a fresh look at things and fix things you didn't even realize were wrong. So
Well, I
yeah,
think that image of giving your work measles is one that will stick. We had a suggestion in the chat about the satanic nightjar, a
no,
real bird. So one maybe perhaps harder to pun with, but one that you could work in some way. Sadly threatened also. So I'm just going to share in the chat the link for the next sessions, the next and last 3 sessions for
which will
mystery
be
writers.
the next one will be the fabulous Dan Stash Hour, I believe.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
yes. And he'll be
And
discussing setting. Yeah. And yeah, I've included that link in the chat, and make sure to bookmark it for more details for the webinars to be announced soon. I was just seeing that the Washington Post had said about Dan's book, American Demon, that he paints each scene with vivid, macabre details. So it feels like the perfect person to be talking about setting. And yes, as Marjorie was noting, registration for that will be opening in a few days. So prime yourself for registering, spread the word as well. Donna, I just wonder to end with, has your own dialogue in your life changed as you spend so much time, with your characters, thinking about how they're going to be saying things? Do you find that the way that you've been communicating has also, do you have a hit list on your own sentences with friends and family?
Not really. I think the effect that writing a character, you know how when someone says something and the right comeback lands in your brain the morning after or maybe the week after. I have learned to be very envious of my protagonist, because if the right comeback doesn't land in for her doesn't land in my brain when I'm writing, I've got all the rest of my draft period to come up with the perfect snapper line. I'm not sure whether it's improved my own dialogue, but it certainly has made me more envious of characters who have writers coming up with their wise sayings.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the very practical techniques, things that people can absolutely employ with their own dialogue. And thank you all for being here this evening. And we'll say goodnight with that. Check out the next sessions and be ready to register for Dan's in a couple of days. Hope you
Okay.
all have a good day. Thank you so much, Donna.
Okay. Good
Bye.
night. Bye-bye.
Bye.